In the fractured world of Aetheris, power rarely comes without a price. Cities rise upon the bones of old wars, and the guilds, those who claim to protect what remains, walk a narrow line between duty and desperation. Among them, one team will uncover something long buried, something that was never meant to be touched. This story follows their descent, not just into the ruins of a forgotten age, but into the fragile, haunting corners of the human mind. It is about loyalty, tested by unseen forces, truth twisted by the echoes of the past, and the choices we make when the light begins to fade. If you listen closely, between the hum of machines and the breath of the dying world, you might hear it too, the dark whispers of Oblivion. Chapter 1. The signal beneath the static. The city of Roith woke each morning like something ancient shaking off decay. Its skyline, an uneven sprawl of soot-stained towers and smog-veiled spires, looked less like architecture and more like the ribcage of a creature that refused to die. Steam hissed from the grates. Machinery coughed. The gutters gleamed slick with oil, rain, and ash. Beneath all that noise, there was a rhythm, the pulse of a city that thrived on exhaustion and ambition, where the guild's banners still clung to cracked stone walls as if daring the world not to forget them. Kale leaned against the window of the guild's operations floor, watching the stormlight smear across the glass. He had that look again, half thoughtful, half tired, like a man perpetually arguing with himself and winning too often. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it one too many times, and the stubble along his jaw looked like it had survived out of spite rather than neglect. Behind him, Lyra sat cross-legged on a desk, tapping her fingers in neat, symmetrical patterns. It wasn't nervousness. Lyra didn't do nervous, but her brain had an itch for order, even when chaos was all she had to work with. "You ever notice," she muttered, "how the vent hum doesn't match the frequency of the lights? It's off by half a beat. Drives me insane." Kale didn't turn. "You've said that before, Lyra." "Yeah, well," she said, adjusting the alignment of 3 pens on the table. "It still hasn't fixed itself." Across the room, Rhiannon sat near the observation deck's glass, her gaze distant, always seeing things half beyond the moment. Her pale blonde hair was braided loosely, fraying at the edges like she'd forgotten to care. There was a quietness to her that wasn't timidness. It was the calm of someone who'd seen too much and still chose gentleness anyway. Kale finally pushed off the window. "You two ever think we've been doing this too long?" Lyra smirked. "Define too long. Long enough to start seeing things in the dark, or long enough to stop caring when you do?" Before Kale could answer, the door creaked open, and the heavy steps of Administrator Dawn echoed across the metallic floor. He was a broad man in his 50s, with a scar cutting through his graying beard, and the posture of someone who'd spent too many years under fire and now stood straighter just to defy memory. Once a soldier, now a guild tactician, the kind of man who replaced sentiment with procedure. "Briefing room," Dawn said, his voice gravelly but calm. "Now, you've got an assignment." Rhiannon blinked out of her reverie. "What kind of assignment?" Dawn tossed a datapad onto the table with a dull clatter. Unusual signal picked up south of the city, near the abandoned perimeter stations. It's not on any known frequency. Could be old tech interference. Could be something else. Kale raised an eyebrow. Something else. Dawn's jaw tightened. The kind of anomaly we don't ignore. Lyra hopped off the desk, brushing off the dust on her trousers. "So, a routine suicide run. Perfect. I was worried today might be dull." Kale smirked faintly. "Don't jinx it." He grabbed the datapad and skimmed the readings. Fluctuating pulse, no discernible origin. This looks more like a malfunction than a threat. Dawn shook his head. Maybe, but the guild doesn't run on maybes. Be ready to move by nightfall. He paused, glancing briefly at Kael before leaving. And Kael, get some rest. You look like you've been wrestling ghosts. The door hissed shut behind him. For a moment, silence settled between them. The low hum of machinery filled the gap like static in a broken transmission. Rhiannon finally stood, brushing back her braid. Do you think it's dangerous? Kael gave a half shrug, half sigh. Everything worth finding usually is. Lyra rolled her eyes, gathering her pack. You sound like one of those pretentious guild inscriptions. Danger reveals the truth, she mocked, holding her hand dramatically to her chest. Kael grinned, faint but real. And yet you're still here. Yeah, she muttered, a small smile curling at her lips. Guess I'm a sucker for bad decisions. The three of them stood in the operations bay, the light outside shifting from grey to a sickly gold as the storm clouds began to thin. Beyond the guild's walls, Royth roared, a city of whispers, engines, and restless ghosts waiting to be named. Kael pocketed the datapad and looked at his team. Pack what you need. We meet in the hangar at dusk. Rhiannon nodded softly. Feels like the start of something. Lyra gave a small snort. Yeah, probably trouble. Kael's gaze drifted once more to the rain-slick streets far below, the signal's coordinates flickering in the back of his mind like a heartbeat that wasn't quite his own. Let's hope it's worth it, he said quietly, because if it's not, someone out there's laughing at us. The city didn't answer. Only the hum of the guild's walls and the faint, uneven rhythm of machinery off by half a beat kept them company. Chapter 2. The Signal. The hangar smelled of oil, metal, and faint ozone from the guild's generators. Kael's boots echoed against the steel floor as he walked past the rows of vehicles, the smell of machinery mixing with the sharp tang of rain that had blown in from the city streets. Outside, Royth groaned under the wind, its towers creaking like old bones. Lyra crouched by one of the smaller hovercrafts, tightening straps and checking gear in her precise, meticulous way. Everything's aligned, she muttered, not looking up. If the stabilizers are off, by even a fraction, we'll be 100 meters short. Kael smirked at her obsession with perfection. Then I'll pray they're off by a fraction, so you have something to do. Rhiannon was already near the transport, her pale hair catching the flickering lights as she adjusted her pack. She hummed softly, almost a tune from her childhood among the Louvren waters, a subtle rhythm that made Kael's chest tighten without reason. She looked up and caught his glance. Storm clouds clearing, she murmured, almost as if she'd been speaking to herself. But the air tastes different. Kael tilted his head, studying her. Different how? Like something's stirring, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Not dangerous, yet, but I can feel it. Lyra rolled her eyes. You and your feelings. Honestly, sometimes you make this whole guild thing sound mystical instead of lethal. Kael chuckled quietly. We've earned the mystique, Lyra. Just don't get caught in it. The transport engines ignited with a low hum that vibrated through the hangar floor. Kael double-checked the readings on the datapad. The unusual signal the administrators had flagged flickered faintly, its origin somewhere deep south beyond the abandoned perimeter stations. Nothing obvious, nothing predictable. Coordinates set, Kael said, tossing the datapad to Rhiannon. I want visual scans every 5 minutes. If this is a malfunction, I don't want to be standing in the wreckage wondering why our boots are on fire. She gave him a faint, wry smile. And if it isn't? Kale's grin was tight. Then I hope your instincts are sharper than your melodrama. Lyra slung her pack over her shoulders, pausing to glance at the city below. Royth looks peaceful from here. I'll bet half the guild would kill to walk these streets right now. Kael's eyes lingered over the horizon, where the smoke from factories and the occasional flash of lightning cut through the storm clouds. Peaceful, he repeated softly, though his gut twisted. For now. The transport doors sealed with a hiss, and the hum of engines swelled. Kael settled into his seat, eyes scanning every readout. The city receded beneath them, its smog blending with the clouds like ink in water. Signals picking up stronger, Rhiannon said after a moment, her voice calm, but her hands slightly trembling as she read the console. Whatever this is, it's alive, or it wants us to think it is. Kael's jaw tightened. Let's hope it's not clever enough to play with us. Lyra leaned back, adjusting her gear. Clever or not, I'd prefer it to be mechanical. No personality, no tricks, just fixable. Kael shook his head, half amused, half grim. Where's the fun in that? As the terrain below shifted from industrial sprawl to cracked, windswept plains, the signal became clearer, pulsing in uneven waves. Nothing on any known frequency, nothing to explain its erratic rhythm. It was a beacon calling them into uncertainty. Rhiannon's gaze drifted forward, dreamy yet alert. I don't know what this is, but as her voice faltered for a fraction of a second, I feel drawn. Kael's eyes narrowed. Drawn doesn't get you home in one piece. Focus, Rhiannon. Eyes on the readings. She nodded, though her fingers brushed lightly against the console, as if instinctively seeking the pulse. The hovercraft shuddered as it entered the abandoned perimeter. Dust swirled over the cracked concrete, the skeletal remains of old communication towers jutting from the ground like the spines of long-dead creatures. Kael's knuckles whitened as he gripped the console. Signals strongest here, he said, voice low. Everyone stay sharp. We don't know what we're stepping into. Lyra's eyes flicked to the ruins. Something about this place feels off, not just abandoned. Kael's gaze swept over his team. Off or not, we have a mission. Stick to the plan and keep your wits. They stepped into the ghostly ruins, the wind carrying the faint hum of the anomaly. It was alive in a way that made the hairs on their arms bristle, a pulse, a whisper. Something ancient, reaching across the void. None of them could name it yet, but every instinct screamed that their first contact with it would change everything. Chapter 3, Pulse in Stone. The ruins loomed like the bones of a dead city, half swallowed by time and fog. Cracked stone walls jutted at odd angles, fragments of archways stretching toward a grey, churning sky. The wind howled through empty corridors, carrying a chill that sank into the marrow. Every step on the uneven, moss-slicked ground echoed, a muted percussion that reminded them how alone they were amidst the ghosts of what had once been. Kael stepped lightly over fractured stones, the chill of damp marble seeping through his boots, every sense alert. Report back to the guild, Kael muttered, pulling the comms unit from his pack. Dax adjusted his own device, the amber glow of its display reflecting off the fractured surfaces. Copy, signals still wild. Something's off here. His voice was steady, though his eyes flicked over the eerie remnants of statues and empty windows with unease. Rhiannon hovered close to Kael, gaze flicking between the shard and his hands. Kael, wait. Her voice carried a tremor of warning as she reached to touch his arm, a grounding gesture meant to halt his movement. The moment her fingers brushed his sleeve, a pulse of energy surged up her arm. Her knees gave way slightly, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Kale froze, feeling the surge ripple through him simultaneously. Images struck without warning, shadowed shapes flitting at impossible angles, whispers threading through his thoughts, unintelligible yet insistent. Heat and cold collided in his mind, vision narrowing as the world bent and twisted. His voice broke, swallowed by a wave of vertigo. His knees buckled, and he sank toward the cracked stone floor. Dax lunged, catching him mid-fall. "Hold him! Stay with me!" His hands gripped firmly, eyes darting to Rhiannon as she swayed beside them, nausea and dizziness threatening to overtake her. Lyra moved swiftly, hands pressing lightly to their shoulders, grounding them with practiced precision. Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through the chaos. "Breathe. Focus. You're with me." Her heart pounded as she felt their tremors, the shallow rise and fall of their chests, the fragile grip on consciousness under the shard's influence. "Guild, can you hear us?" Kael rasped, voice hoarse. "We need immediate extraction." The words fell away as visions tightened their hold, shards of impossible landscapes and whispering voices threading through his skull. The guild's voice came over the comms, urgent. "Team, pull back. Return to base immediately." Kael and Rhiannon tried to respond, but the world constricted, heat, cold, and sound colliding into an overwhelming haze. Heads spinning, stomachs churning, they collapsed fully, hearts hammering, eyes rolling as darkness swallowed them. Lyra and Dax caught them before their bodies hit the stone. Lyra's hands remained steady, guiding their vitals back towards stability. Fear gnawed at her, a quiet, pervasive panic as she realized how easily the shard had overpowered them. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds, and slowly, imperceptibly, Kael and Rhiannon's eyes flickered open. Sweat clung to their skin, breaths ragged, hearts still racing. Dax held Rhiannon upright, muttering under his breath, "You scared the hell out of me." Kael shook his head slowly, a thin trickle of blood at his lip. It called to me," he admitted quietly, voice rough. "And Rhiannon—" His hand brushed hers instinctively, the only contact grounding him as remnants of visions lingered. Rhiannon whispered, voice fragile, "It's alive. I felt it. Inside me too." She shook her head, struggling to clear the lingering images. Lyra exhaled, tension rolling off her shoulders as she assessed them. "Stay grounded. Focus on breathing. The guild will debrief and tell us what to do next," Dax muttered, shaking his head. "Next time, we avoid glowing, pulsing things that want to fry our brains." Kael managed a thin, dry smile, chest tight. "Agreed. Document, report, survive. Get through this." The shard's glow dimmed slightly as the team backed away, but its pulse lingered in their bones, subtle yet insistent. Something had marked them. Something had changed. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Uneasy Calm. The air at the base of the guild in Royth felt heavier than usual, even for the dim morning light that filtered through high, narrow windows. Kael sat slumped at the edge of his cot, fingers pressed lightly to his temple, lingering pulse of headache, dulling but not disappearing. Rhiannon sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, pale and quiet, eyes clouded with the echoes of what they'd seen. Dax moved through the room, tossing a small loaf of bread and salted meat onto a nearby table. "Eat something," he said, with an easy shrug, though his amber eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're going to need strength for the debrief. And don't look at me like I don't understand how you both feel. That shard—" His voice trailed off, unspoken images flickering behind his gaze. Lyra hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, a subtle twitch in her fingers betraying her unease. "Vitals are stable, though I'll keep monitoring them," she said, her quirkiness showing in the precise arrangement of her med supplies on the table. "But let's not pretend this wasn't serious." Kael exhaled slowly, finally lowering his hands. "It called to me. I couldn't resist." "And Rhiannon?" He stopped, letting the weight of the shared experience hang between them, unspoken but palpable. Rhiannon's voice was soft. "I felt it too, in a way I didn't expect. It was foreign, but oddly familiar." She traced a finger along the edge of her cot, as if trying to map the memory of the visions in her mind. The team lingered in the quiet for a moment, letting the tension settle. Even Dax, usually quick to joke or deflect, let silence reign for a few beats, acknowledging the gravity of the shard's influence. Kael finally stood, voice firm, though tinged with residual fatigue. "We report to the guild leaders. They'll want a full account of the encounter. Then we plan our next steps." His dry humor slipped in with a slight smirk. "I don't fancy being called fragile after that little nap." Rhiannon allowed herself a small smile in return, the closeness of their shared ordeal threading a subtle connection between them. Lyra muttered under her breath, shaking her head, but with a faint upward twitch at the corner of her mouth. "You two are insufferable." As they gathered their things, a faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to linger in the air. Kael and Rhiannon felt it in their bones, a reminder of the shard's presence, even at a distance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the guild halls, the calm after the storm deceptively serene. The mission wasn't over, not even close. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Mind. The guild base in Royth was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that presses against the ears and settles in the chest. The courtyard below was shrouded in a thin mist, curling around the stone walkways and archways, leaving the fountains half hidden and the carved statues eerily distorted. Kael leaned on the cold stone railing of the upper balcony, eyes tracing the slow movements of the mist. The shard's influence tugged at him at the edges of thought, a faint, persistent pulse that made concentration slippery, like trying to hold on to water in his hands. His temples throbbed with a dull ache, a reminder that no amount of tonic would fully erase its subtle effect. Inside the common hall, Rhiannon sat at a wide wooden table, her hands wrapped around a cup of steaming herbal infusion. The scent of lavender and crushed bark rose in soft spirals, a small comfort against the lingering unease. She watched Kael from across the room, noting the way he rubbed the back of his neck, the tense set of his shoulders, even as he tried to appear composed. "You didn't sleep much last night," she said quietly, her voice carrying a gentle lilt, like the pulse of a tide. Kael gave a half smile, a flash of dry humor in the midst of lingering tension. "Neither did you," he countered, though the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed him. "The shard seems to enjoy keeping us on edge." Rhiannon's lips curved faintly, her eyes darkened with the shadow of exhaustion. "More like it's messing with our heads," she replied, voice soft but pointed. "Literally, it's like trying to hold on to a half-remembered dream. The closer you get, the more it slips through your fingers." Dax, sprawled casually across a chair near the table, rolled his shoulders, and muttered, "Sleep? Yeah, right. That ship sailed last night. Not after what we saw out there." His amber eyes flicked between Kale and Rhiannon, reflective, but carrying the familiar spark of defiance and stubborn energy that usually carried him through the worst of situations. Lyra moved around the table with quiet precision, flipping through her worn med journal and arranging herbs and tinctures in a neat line. "The neurological symptoms are unlike anything we've catalogued before," she murmured, speaking more to herself than anyone else. "Headaches, slight nausea, irregular sleep patterns. Some effects respond to common tinctures, but the dreams are another matter entirely." Her gaze flicked to the group briefly, sharp and observant, before returning to her notes. Kale sank into a chair opposite Rhiannon, rubbing the back of his neck. The ache there was sharper now, a dull roar in the background of his thoughts. "The visions," he began, hesitating. "They're fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle someone keeps rearranging. Shadows, shapes, fleeting movements, patterns that I can't fully comprehend." He paused, the words faltering as the hum of influence prickled his senses. "But I feel like they're trying to tell us something." Rhiannon nodded, tracing the rim of her cup absently with a finger. "I've been seeing them too. Not the exact same things, but connected somehow. There's a presence, faint, shifting. You can't define it, but it's there, always watching." Her words hovered in the room, heavy with quiet unease. Dax stretched, leaning back, with a faint, almost cynical grin. "So, we're officially screwed. Fantastic." His attempt at levity didn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the table. The conversation shifted as each of them recounted fragments of dreams, flashes of movement, impressions left behind by the shard's subtle influence. Kale found himself observing Rhiannon more than he realized, the way her fingers unconsciously curled around her cup, the slight furrow of her brow as she described a particularly vivid impression. There was a growing understanding between them, an unspoken tether forming that neither had fully acknowledged. By late afternoon, the guild's corridors grew long and shadowed, the light slanting through high windows to strike dust motes into sharp focus. Kael's headache had strengthened into a persistent throb, his body growing weary from the weight of the visions that clawed at his mind. The shard's pull was subtle but unmistakable, a rhythm he felt at the edges of consciousness, making sleep elusive. That night, Kael lay on his cot, staring at the stone ceiling. The dull pain in his head throbbed in time with the visions that slipped behind his eyelids. Shapes moved in the darkness, impossible to name, almost alive. Breathing became a deliberate act, each inhale sharp and unsatisfying, the pressure on his chest unfamiliar and pressing. Rhiannon, in the next room, was similarly restless, the infusion untouched beside her bed. The images from the shard crawled through her thoughts like tendrils, indistinct but heavy, tugging at memories and emotions she couldn't place. She shivered and adjusted her blankets, feeling an inexplicable sense of connection to Kael across the hall, even without words. And then, in the shadowed corners of the mind, came the faintest glimmer, a fragment of something impossible to define. Kael's chest tightened, his teeth clenched against the pulsing headache, and he realized just how subtly the shard had already begun to reshape them, threading its influence into the very fabric of thought. The guild base in Royth was quiet, but in the rooms above, two minds were already caught in its echo. Chapter 6. Shadows of Influence. Kael pressed his palms to his temples as he stepped into the estate, the persistent throb in his head like an unyielding drum. The fragmentary sleep, haunted by vague, shadowed visions, had left him raw, tense, and on edge. Rhiannon had stayed behind at the base to rest, though her own unease mirrored his. Now he needed counsel from people who had faced the world's uncertainties and lived. His parents, seated at the breakfast table, looked up in unison, concern flickering across their faces. His mother's hands rested on the table, clasped together as if bracing herself, while his father studied him with measured, steady eyes. I need to talk to you both about something, Kyle said, his voice carrying a tension that belied his normally controlled demeanor. He sank into a chair, pressing a hand to his forehead. It's strange, and I don't fully understand it myself. Something we encountered during the mission. It's a shard, an artifact. Since coming into contact with it, I've been seeing things, dreams, visions, headaches, nausea, and it's not just me, Rhiannon. His words trailed, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. His mother leaned forward slightly, a subtle crease forming on her brow. Kale, you're worrying us. Before you've even said anything concrete, take your time. Tell us what's happening. It calls to me, he admitted, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. Subtly at first. I didn't notice it much, but now it's persistent. And the visions, they're intense but vague. I can't make sense of them. I don't know what it wants or why it affects Rhiannon too. His father's hand settled on Kyle's shoulder, firm and grounding. A shard, you say? Something magical, perhaps? Or is it something you've touched in the physical sense? Kale exhaled sharply. It's both, I think. I can't describe it accurately. I can't ignore it, though. It's starting to interfere with my everything. Sleep, focus. It's subtle, but insistent. And I've realized I need guidance. People with knowledge that goes beyond what we do at the Guild. His mother's eyes softened, her voice calm, but quietly insistent. Kale, you've faced danger before, but this isn't just danger. It's something beyond your usual experience. You shouldn't try to bear it alone. There are scholars, wise men and women, even magical academies. Perhaps the University of Eldarin in Valen could help you understand what's happening. Kale's brow furrowed. Eldarin? You think they'd have insight into this shard? His father gave a slow nod. It's not guaranteed, of course, but they study phenomena far beyond the ordinary. And if anyone can help you unravel this, guide you through its influence, it's them. You might also consult the scholars in Valen itself. Not all knowledge is confined to one place, and some of these artifacts have histories that the Guild might never fully catalogue. His mother placed a hand over his, a small but grounding gesture. And Kale, Rhiannon, you'll need each other's support while you figure this out. You don't have to face it alone. Take care in the way you work with each other, and when you go to Valen, approach it cautiously. These things are as dangerous as they are fascinating. Kale leaned back, absorbing their words. I don't want to lose control of it, or of myself. The shard, whatever it is, it's more than I've faced before. His father offered a faint smile, tinged with pride and concern. Then you'll have to face it carefully. You've always done what's necessary, Kale. Now, you'll just need a little guidance beyond your own. Kale nodded slowly, the weight of their advice settling on his shoulders. Then Valen it is, University of Eldarin and the city's scholars. We start there. His mother gave a subtle nod, not overbearing, but supportive. Good. And remember, even the strongest hands sometimes need help. With a final glance at his parents, Kyle rose from the table, the room carrying the warmth of familial understanding amidst the lingering unease of what lay ahead. The journey to Valen awaited, and with it, answers, or at least clues, about the shard that had begun to weave its influence into their lives. Kael remained in the estate's study long after breakfast had ended, the room quiet, except for the distant hum of servants going about their duties. The morning light fell unevenly across the worn wooden floor, highlighting dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. He didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the map of Valen spread across the table, fingers tracing streets and districts absent-mindedly. He let out a low sigh. This isn't just about tracking the shard anymore, he thought. It's about understanding it, before it understands us. The headaches had eased slightly since returning from the mission, but the lingering nausea, the faint hum at the edges of his vision, the dreams that clawed at the back of his mind, they all reminded him of how little control he truly had. Rhiannon felt it too, he considered. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. The shard reaches farther than we can see. And he shook his head, pressing his palms against his eyes for a moment. I can't let it get to her, or anyone else. He leaned against the table, staring down at the map. The streets and canals of Valen were a blur of ink and parchment, but in his mind they were alive with the possibilities and dangers awaiting them. Scholars, mages, city guards, and the inevitable rumors that would color their inquiries, everything needed to be accounted for. We go there not as adventurers, not as treasure hunters, he thought, but as observers, as collectors of knowledge. And whatever this shard is, we need answers before it's too late. Kael ran a hand over the back of his neck, the tension coiling like a spring in his shoulders. His parents' concern lingered in his mind, their cautious words, his mother's subtle worry that she tried to mask with gentle reassurances, his father's quiet but pointed insistence that he be careful. He knew they couldn't fully understand what he was experiencing, not yet, but their support grounded him in ways he hadn't realized. All right, he told himself, straightening. Time to get back to base. We need a plan, and we need it before we even set foot in Valen. With that thought, Kael rolled the map carefully, tucking it under his arm. The weight of the upcoming journey pressed against him, a familiar mix of dread and determination. He stepped toward the door, each footfall echoing softly in the empty room, ready to rejoin his team and begin the careful orchestration of their next move. Chapter 7. Shadows. At dawn, Gul moved through the winding streets of Royth with measured steps, the chill morning air biting at his cheeks. The estate faded behind him, its stone walls and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the grime and grit of the city streets. He kept his hood low, not that anyone paid him much attention. These streets had seen too many faces to linger on one. His thoughts churned with the weight of the shard's influence, the dreams that clawed at his sleep, the persistent headaches that refused to dull even with the medicine from the infirmary. He recalled the conversation with his parents, their cautious concern, their advice to consult scholars in Valen. Kael had left much unsaid, filtering the truth through the veil of what they could handle. Still, the fragment of unease gnawed at him, that whisper of something vast and unknowable calling from the visions. Every corner of the city seemed to press closer as he passed. Cracked stone, faded banners, and the occasional shout of street vendors painted a world moving around him, oblivious to the storm in his mind. He clenched his fists briefly, the rough fabric of his gloves biting into his palms, grounding him in the present. He passed a small market, the smell of roasted meats and sharp bread rolling past him. A group of children played nearby, laughter carrying against the clatter of hooves and the distant rumble of carts over cobblestones. A normal day, and yet Kyle felt the shard's pull lurking at the edge of his senses, invisible but insistent. Back to the base, he muttered to himself, voice low, dry, almost humorless. It was a small affirmation, but it steadied him, reminded him of the purpose he carried beyond his personal unease. His mind flicked over the team, Rhiannon, Dax, Lyra, and the shard's shadow over them all. He couldn't let it unravel what they'd built, not when they were so close to uncovering something bigger than themselves. The base rose ahead, a fortress of stone and steel nestled against the northern hills. The walls were battered, streaked with rain and soot, yet fortified, humming faintly with enchantments the newer recruits could never fully understand. Torches flickered in the watchtowers, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Guards passed on routine patrol, nodding at Kael in recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the team's standing in the guild. Kael entered the main gates, the heavy doors groaning as he pushed them open. Inside, the familiar scent of metal polish, parchment, and the faint undertone of medicinal herbs hit him, grounding him further. He took a moment to let the sounds of the base, distant clang of the smithy, murmured conversations of apprentices, and the soft creak of floorboards settle him. Kael! Dax's voice cut through the din, casual but tinged with relief. He was perched near a table stacked with maps and notes, lazily cleaning a dagger with a rag. "You look like hell. Rough visit home?" Kael's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "You could say that." He shook his head, trying to dispel the lingering unease. Rhiannon stepped closer, eyes sharp, despite her normally dreamy demeanor. "Everything all right?" Her voice was calm, but Kael caught the subtle tension beneath it. She knew something was wrong, always knew before he said a word. "Family suggested consulting scholars," Kael said, finally letting the words out. "Valen, there's information we might need, and I'm not sure where else to start." Lyra's hands were already fiddling with a set of vials on a nearby shelf, arranging them with meticulous precision. "Valen, huh? Then we'd better make sure we're not walking in blind. I'll start cross-referencing local records and spell inventories. If there's a trail, we'll find it." Her tone was clipped but efficient, as always, though a faint smirk suggested she found comfort in order amid chaos. Dax leaned back, folding his arms, amber eyes narrowing slightly. "Great, more travel. Don't forget, I get to pick the taverns this time. Someone's got to make sure we eat properly." Kael allowed himself a half laugh, the sound dry. "Noted. But first, we plan. Every detail counts." His eyes flicked to Rhiannon. "We can't afford mistakes, especially now." They gathered near the table, poring over maps and notes, voices low but engaged, debating routes and potential obstacles. Outside, the base hummed with life, its defenses and shadows reminding Kael that while the city of Royth carried on, there were things moving beyond his sight, unseen and patient. He tried to shake the restlessness gnawing at him. The shard was still a distant threat, but even from here, he felt its pull in subtle ways, headaches flaring at odd times, dreams seeping into the edges of his thoughts. As the day waned, Kael stood by a window overlooking the courtyard. The low light of late afternoon painted everything in dull gold and black, shadows stretching like tendrils across the stone. He let himself linger, the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. One thing was clear: their journey to Valen was going to be more than just research. It was the first step into something far larger than the guild, the city, or even themselves. And Kael knew They couldn't turn back. Chapter 8. Journey to Valen. The carriage rolled over uneven stone roads, jolting with each rutted groove. Morning mist clung to the hills like cold smoke, curling around the distant tree line. Kael's eyes flicked over the landscape, scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of someone used to danger. But today, it was anticipation more than threat that kept him alert. Dax leaned back against the seat, idly kicking the side of the carriage. "You know," he said, voice low but edged with humor, "if we make it through this trip without you micromanaging every move, I might start believing in miracles." Kael let a dry smirk curve his lips. "Miracles? I'd sooner believe you capable of walking 10 paces without arguing with your own boots." Rhiannon's laughter was soft but genuine, threading between them like smoke. "Honestly, the two of you bicker like you've known each other for centuries. I'm not even in the conversation, yet I feel the urge to roll my eyes." Dax tilted his head, eyes sparkling. "Careful, dreamer. One more comment like that, and you're officially drafted into our running commentary." Lyra, fussing with her satchel straps, murmured under her breath, "I don't see what's so fascinating about boots," but didn't lift her gaze from the road. Her tone was clipped, almost absent-minded, an OCD tinge to her observation, habitual rather than pointed. As Valen's walls loomed ahead, jagged against the muted sky, the group grew quiet. The streets buzzed with the hum of life, merchants shouting over carts, children weaving through the crowd, guards moving with measured precision. Smoke from distant chimneys mingled with the scent of bread and damp stone, a stark contrast to the chill wind outside the carriage. The team pulled to a halt before a modest inn, its wooden sign swinging lazily on rusted iron. Inside, the tavern's warmth was immediate. The sharp tang of roasted meat, the deep burn of ale, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Kael guided them to a table near the hearth. Cloaks and travel-worn satchels were abandoned with practiced ease. Dax lifted a dark ale and grinned. "Finally, something worth drinking." Rhiannon's gaze swept the room, catching snippets of life. Merchants counting coin, travelers arguing over directions. "Interesting," she murmured. "Not that I'll comment on everything, of course." A faint smile touched her lips. Lyra pulled out a notebook, quickly sketching the layout of the room. "Just a rough record. One never knows what might prove useful." Kael raised his mug, voice dry. "To surviving the road and not losing anyone to misjudged enthusiasm before the mission even begins." "Speak for yourself," Dax said, lifting his mug with a wry grin. Nearby, a merchant with a scar running across his cheek leaned against the bar. "New faces, eh?" he said, his tone curious but cautious. "What brings travelers like you to Valen?" Kael replied, careful not to reveal too much. "Business mostly. Information, reports, guild matters." The man snorted. "Information, you say? Funny how that always leads to trouble." He shook his head, clearly amused by the group's composed but guarded demeanor. Rhiannon tilted her head. "And trouble is sometimes worth finding," she said lightly, letting the words trail like a soft laugh. Lyra asked the bartender about hidden alcoves and offhanded details of the city. "Any less obvious places someone might go unnoticed?" she asked, tapping a pen against her notebook. The bartender eyed her sharply, then smirked. "Depends on what you mean by unnoticed. This city likes to see and hear everything, mostly." Kael caught a brief exchange between two locals, arguing about coin and wagons, leaning back to observe their gestures. "Seems Valen thrives on conflict as much as commerce," he murmured, dryly. Dax chuckled. And here I thought we were coming for information, not a masterclass in social dynamics. As night fell, the tavern thinned to murmurs and flickering candlelight. The group retired to their rooms, shedding the day's dust. Kale lingered by the window, gazing down at the quiet streets below, the fire's last embers casting shadows across the room. Though the shard's influence had yet to make itself known, there was a subtle tension in the air, the weight of the city pressing like a quiet threat. Kale had lingered longer than he should, sitting by the tavern's dim hearth long after the others had retired. The muted chatter of patrons below had faded to an occasional creak of floorboards and the sigh of the wind through the streets of Valen. He finally rose, muscles stiff from hours of tense waiting, and made his way to the small room the inn had offered. He tried to push the shard's lingering pull from his mind, the strange visions and discomfort from earlier still tugging at the edges of his thoughts. The bed was narrow, the sheets coarse, but it would have to do. He lay down, eyes tracing the ceiling's rough timbers, letting the quiet lull him toward sleep. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, before a scream tore him from unconsciousness. His eyes snapped open to darkness, sweat slicking his hair to his forehead. The remnants of the dream clung to his mind, vague yet insistent, leaving his chest heaving as if he had run a mile in the dark. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, twisting into shapes that seemed both familiar and impossibly wrong. A cold prickle ran down his spine. Not again, he thought, trying to quell the panic. Focus. It's just a dream. But even as he told himself that, the lingering pressure at the back of his skull reminded him that it was far more than that. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, feet touching the chill wood floor. The tavern's quiet hum drifted up through the shutters. Kale's hands clenched and unclenched as he struggled to settle the uneasy energy coursing through him. Rhiannon, already awake, gave a quiet knock at the door. "Bad night?" she asked softly. Kale shook his head, though a wry tension threaded through his voice. "You could say that. The city sleeps easier than my mind does." She offered a faint, understanding smile. Sometimes the quiet is worse. He let the words hang for a moment before taking a deep breath and forcing himself upright. Today, they would head to the university to seek what little insight the scholars could provide, and perhaps begin to unravel the influence of the shard that had already begun to seep into their waking hours. Chapter 9. Whispers in the Wind. The streets of Valen were waking, the morning light catching on damp cobblestones and the spires of the city's many towers. Merchants shouted from carts piled high with fruits, fabrics, and curious trinkets. Smoke from chimneys twisted into the pale sky, and the air carried a sharp tang of salt and soot. The inn's common room was quiet as the team gathered their gear, the lingering tension from Kale's restless night still hanging between them. Kale led the way, his eyes scanning the city with a restless intensity. Even the bustling streets felt like a shadowed stage. Every passerby, a fleeting character in the story, the shard seemed to whisper at him. He kept his thoughts close, letting the others chatter and banter to mask the uneasy tightness coiling in his chest. They reached the gates of the university, its tall, ivy-clad walls flanked by stern stone gargoyles that seemed to watch their every movement. Scholars in flowing robes shuffled along the courtyards, scrolls and tomes clutched tightly in their hands. The air smelled faintly of parchment, incense, and the faint metallic tang of ink. Kale approached the main doors and raised a hand, calling out to a scholar perched behind a stone desk. "I need guidance. Someone, anyone, who might understand unusual energy readings. He hesitated, faltering slightly at the sight of their stern faces. A man stepped forward, tall, thin, hair pulled into a tight knot at the nape of his neck. "State your name and purpose," he said, voice crisp and precise. "The university does not entertain idle speculation." "I'm Kael Arkwright," Kael said firmly. "We've detected a signal outside the city, something anomalous, unlike anything we've catalogued. I need to know if there's historical or arcane precedent." The scholar's eyes flicked over him, sharp and assessing. "Anomalous energy, you say? He motioned to another scholar, a woman with severe grey hair streaked with white. "Let them speak, Mirren." Mirren's lips pursed as she regarded Kael. "Few have reported what you claim," she said, voice clipped. "There are old texts, fragments of them, that mention energy sources not of this world. But you must understand, much is conjecture. The archives are restricted, and even within them, clarity is scarce." Dax leaned toward Kael, whispering with a smirk. "Sounds like a polite way of saying, 'Go away, city boy.'" Kael shot him a glance, dry humor undercutting his tension. "I'd rather not be dismissed before I've even started asking questions." Rhiannon's hand brushed against his sleeve unconsciously, her eyes scanning the courtyards with that distant, dreamy focus she always carried. "Some knowledge comes slowly," she murmured, almost to herself, "even if it is buried in fear and superstition." Another scholar, younger and more upright, interjected sharply. "Do not mistake myth for fact. We can provide historical context, perhaps, but do not expect revelation." Kael pressed on. "Are there any records of artifacts, sources of energy, that influence those who encountered them?" "Even vaguely?" The first scholar, Elion, frowned. "Vaguely, yes. In texts too fragmented to be of much use, certain objects are recorded as awakened or listening, though the descriptions are cryptic at best. Only a handful of these incidents are documented." Mirren added, "And even then, many of those reports come from travelers and mercenaries. Their testimony is often unreliable. We rely on corroborated evidence, something tangible, measurable." Kael tilted his head. "So, all we get are anecdotes? Nothing concrete?" Mirren pursed her lips. "Anecdotes, yes. Warnings, certainly. What you seek is perilous. Proceed with caution, should you choose to follow these threads." Dax muttered under his breath. Caution is their favorite word. Rhiannon's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Perhaps caution is a friend, at least until we understand what we are truly facing." A third scholar, a tall man with a silver streak in his otherwise black hair, approached. "If you intend to investigate, you may consult restricted manuscripts in the East Wing, only 2 at a time, and no touching the enchanted volumes without gloves." Kael nodded. "Understood. Thank you." Leaving the scholars, the group wandered into the Eastern Wing, where dusty tomes lined the walls, some chained to their shelves. Every scroll and book seemed to hum with its own history. Kael's eyes lingered on cryptic sketches, faint diagrams of objects that seemed almost alive, yet nothing that definitively matched their signal. The team left the university with more questions than answers. The Shard's subtle tug at Kael and Rhiannon felt stronger now, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that threaded through his veins and under Rhiannon's skin. Neither spoke of it aloud, the tension between them unspoken but palpable. As they navigated the streets back to the inn, Kael's mind lingered on the scholar's words, on the fragments of texts that hinted at objects of immense power, and on the whispering pulse at the back of his skull. The Shard was calling, but not yet within reach, and he felt the weight of the unknown pressing against him from every corner of the city. At the inn, they sat in silence over their meal. Thick bread, spice stew, and watered wine. Small, casual exchanges punctuated the heavy atmosphere. Dax joked about the scholar's severe robes. Rhiannon teased Lyra lightly about her ever-meticulous satchel, and Kyle, despite the gnawing pressure at his temples, managed a dry remark about the university's obsession with procedure, yet the shard's influence lingered like a shadow brushing at the edge of consciousness, a promise that the unknown was coming, and when it did, it would not be ignored. The team moved through the quiet streets, the day's frustrations still hanging over them. Kale's fingers drummed against his packstrap, tension tight in his shoulders. "Upright little prigs," Dax muttered, shaking his head. "All titles, all posturing. No answers." "Better than the alternative," Rhiannon replied, nudging his arm. "If they actually admitted to knowing something, we'd be stuck there forever." Lyra smirked softly, adjusting her satchel. "You two can argue about their faults later. Right now, we need sleep. None of us are at our sharpest." Dax grinned wryly. "And you think you are?" "I manage," she said, shrugging, though her hands moved over her pack as if double-checking something invisible. They reached the inn and were shown to their rooms without much fuss. Mugs of bitter, smoky ale were poured in the common room as the team sat around a worn table. "Honestly," Dax said, swirling the liquid in his mug, "I half expect some scholar to leap out and demand our notes back, like we're thieves of knowledge." Kale raised an eyebrow. "Better that than getting some lecture on the ethics of discovery while the world burns outside." Rhiannon chuckled. "Kale, your ethics lectures could rival theirs, you know." "Maybe," he muttered, "but I'd at least aim to keep the team alive while doing it." Lyra shook her head, letting out a soft laugh. "Focus, both of you. Tomorrow's task isn't going to do itself." Eventually, they left the common room, each retreating to their rooms. Kael lay under the threadbare sheets, heart still hammering from the day. Shadows stretched across the ceiling, drawing his thoughts back to the shard, the signal, the unknown that had tugged at him. Sleep came fitfully, never steady, leaving him restless and alert even in the darkness. Dax's snores echoed faintly down the hall. Rhiannon muttered soft phrases in her dreams, and Lyra shifted quietly in her room. But outside the inn, the night waited in silence, holding the whisper of something yet to come. The first hours of sleep were shallow, broken by murmurs of a restless mind. Kael twisted beneath the thin blanket, sweat prickling at his brow. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, dark and shifting, as if the walls themselves were breathing. A sudden jolt pulled him upright. Heart hammering, he gripped the edge of the mattress, eyes wide in the half-dark. Whispers curled in the corners of his mind, unintelligible but urgent. "They watch, they want to erase." The words felt familiar and alien all at once, like echoes bouncing across a distance he couldn't measure. Kael's hands shook as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. His throat tightened, breath shallow. The room seemed impossibly close, walls pressing inward, shadows crawling across the floor like liquid. He tried to ground himself, eyes darting to the window where the moonlight pooled faintly on the worn floorboards. A dull, relentless headache throbbed at his temples, paired with a queasy twist in his stomach. He pressed his hands to his head, fighting the nausea that rose in a creeping tide. Sleep had been no refuge. If anything, it had dragged him deeper into a strange, otherworldly tension. Rhiannon's voice floated into his mind, faint and echoing from dreams he didn't remember entering. The pull, the shard, was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it tugged at him, threading through the edges of his consciousness like cold water seeping through a crack. He groaned softly, leaning against the wall, fighting the urge to call out, "Focus, Kyle. Just breathe." He closed his eyes, imagining the calm of the base, the familiar weight of his pack, the steady presence of his team. But the shadows clung stubbornly to the edges of his vision. Eventually, the throbbing in his head ebbed just enough to crawl back under the covers. His chest rose and fell, uneven, as if sleep were a fragile vessel, carrying him forward into the next day, unsteady and wary. The shard had made its first quiet mark, and Kale didn't yet know how deep it would reach. Chapter 10. Arrival. The morning haze clung to the streets as the team slipped from their inn, feet echoing against worn cobblestones slick with dew. Merchants were opening stalls, the scent of baked bread and roasting meats mingling with the acrid tang of smoke from chimneys. Lyra's sharp eyes flicked from shadowed alleyways to overhanging signs, noting the subtle oddities of the city, the uneven stonework, the faded murals of some long-forgotten victory. "Watch your step," Dax muttered, sidestepping a puddle. "They've patched this part of the road like 3 times this century." Rhiannon's gaze lingered on a narrow canal where the water swirled dark and oily. "I wonder how long it's been stagnant like that," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Kael's stride was purposeful, though his hand occasionally brushed against his temple, where a dull, throbbing ache reminded him of the night's unrest. He ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand, learning what they could about the unusual energy readings that had brought them here. The team wound through a market square, asking quietly after scholars, mages, or anyone rumored to have knowledge of strange phenomena. Most shrugged, others eyed them warily, and a few muttered warnings about madmen and omens. The answers were scant, frustrating, but not unexpected. It was near the edge of the square, just past a stack of overturned barrels, that a commotion caught their attention. A man, hunched and disheveled, was being dragged from the doorway of a small tavern. His brown eyes were wild, flecked with the milky haze of early cataracts, and his grizzled face was streaked with blood. They watch us," he shouted, his voice cracking. "They want to erase us." The guards were heavy-handed, yanking him upright by his arms. He stumbled, then lashed out drunkenly, swinging a fist that barely grazed the first guard. Another punch sent him sprawling, blood trickling from a split lip. He scrambled up again, defiant, and a second guard's blow snapped his nose with a sickening crack. Kael and Rhiannon froze, the words cutting through the city's morning din like a knife. Something in the way he raved, the insistence, the terror, the fragments of clarity in his eyes made them exchange a glance. Curiosity piqued, a strange pull threading through the air between them. Lyra's hand instinctively went to Kael's arm, feeling the tension in his shoulders. "We shouldn't interfere," she murmured, her voice low. "It's illegal here. I've been in this city before. You get involved and they'll have your heads." The man struggled to his knees, shaking off the pain with sheer stubbornness, but another swing from a guard sent him collapsing. They hauled him toward the jail, his cries fading into the clamor of the street. "They're watching. They'll erase us." Kael's jaw tightened. Something about the way the words echoed in his mind stirred a vague unease, a familiarity he couldn't yet name. Rhiannon's eyes had gone slightly distant, her dreamy focus catching the rhythm of his words, the cadence of fear and knowledge entwined. The team followed silently, blending with the crowd without drawing attention. The guards marched the man off like he was a criminal, but Kyle and Rhiannon couldn't shake the sensation that there was more to him than drunken ranting. The shard influence tugged faintly at the edges of Kyle's perception, subtle yet insistent, though he had no idea it was only beginning. By the time they returned to the inn, the street had returned to its usual rhythm. Patrons muttered complaints, merchants barked prices, and the city moved on as though nothing had happened. But Kale and Rhiannon felt a seed planted, a question lodged in the marrow of their curiosity. Who was this man? And why did his words resonate so disturbingly with the inexplicable energy they were tracking? The inn was dimly lit, the low hum of conversation and clatter of mugs filling the room. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the warmth from the hearth offered a quiet reprieve from the streets outside. The team gathered around a scarred wooden table in a corner, half-empty mugs in hand, letting the murmur of other patrons wash over them. "That was something," Dax said finally, swirling the dark liquid in his mug. "That guy's either completely mad or we just stumbled onto something we don't understand." Rhiannon's eyes were distant, still catching fragments of the man's voice. There was clarity in his madness, something about what he said. "I can't explain it." She tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "It's unsettling, but I think we need to know more." Lyra tapped her fingers against her mug, an almost imperceptible rhythm that suggested her mind was racing. "We can't just waltz into a city jail. That would be illegal, and if the guards see us poking around, we'd be the ones in trouble," she said, voice calm but firm. "Been here before. Trust me, you don't want to get on the wrong side of these people." Kael leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I know it's risky, but if he's connected to whatever energy we've been tracking, we can't just ignore it." His voice was measured, but there was a tension in his shoulders he didn't quite hide. "We need information, and he might be the only lead we've got in this city." Dax grinned, raising a brow. "So our plan is sit here and stare at each other like we're waiting for inspiration to hit?" "Not exactly," Kael said dryly, a hint of humor breaking through. "We wait until we know the rules of engagement, and then we proceed with one person." His gaze flicked to the others. "I'll go. You lot stay put." "Of course," Lyra said, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "Because you always volunteer to do the dangerous part first." She shook her head. "Just try not to get yourself killed, all right?" Rhiannon chuckled softly, though her voice was edged with worry. "Try not to die before we figure out what he's hiding, Kael." Kael allowed a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Noted. I'll keep that in mind." They fell into a quiet hum of conversation after that, speculating on what the man's words might mean, debating the shard's possible influence, and sharing anecdotes from previous missions, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the street below the inn's window. Lyra occasionally jotted notes in the corner of a leather-bound journal, while Dax leaned back, scanning the room with that half-distracted, half-scheming air he always carried. By the time night fell, Kael was ready. He stood, adjusting his coat, and the others fell silent. "Remember," Lyra said softly, "one at a time. No mistakes." Kael nodded, giving each of them a brief glance. "I'll be careful. Stay here, gather whatever information you can on your end, and we'll regroup." Kael stepped into the damp chill of the night, the inn's warmth and chatter fading behind him as he made his way toward the jail. His boots clacked sharply on the cobblestones, each step echoing in the empty street. The shard's lingering influence tugged at the edges of his mind, a dull thrum in his temples, making the shadows feel heavier than they were. The jail loomed ahead, a squat stone building with barred windows and a torch flickering against the wind. A guard, broad-shouldered and stern, blocked the entrance, his hands resting on the hilt of a short sword. His gaze swept Cale up and down, sharp and assessing. "Evening," Cale said, keeping his tone firm. "I need to see the man dragged out of the tavern earlier. The one yelling about—" He hesitated, unsure how to describe the madness he'd witnessed. The guard's eyes narrowed. "You don't just waltz in and speak to him because you feel like it." His voice was rough, authoritative, with a hint of amusement. "State your name and your business." "I'm Cale," he said steadily. "I'm here to speak with him. That's all." The guard's mouth twisted into a thin, tight smile. "Cale, huh? Bold. The man's name is Thorin Malrich. You'll find him in cell 12. Don't think you're stepping on anyone else's authority in there, or I'll make sure you regret it." Cale nodded, swallowing the unease coiling in his chest. "Understood." The guard waved him forward, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Move along, then, and keep your wits about you. He's not a man to underestimate, even in chains." Cale took a deep breath, gripping the note with Thorin's cell number. The torchlight flickered across the stone walls as he approached the iron door, each step measured. Inside waited a man whose presence had stirred the city into chaos just hours before, and Cale had no idea what truths or dangers he would uncover. The iron door groaned as Cale pushed it open, the clang echoing through the narrow stone corridor. A damp, sour smell hit him immediately, the scent of mildew and old sweat thick in the air. Torches flickered along the walls, throwing shadows that danced like restless spirits. "Name's Cale," he said again, stepping into the cell. His voice bounced off the stone, firm but careful, measuring the man before him. Thorin Malrich sat hunched on a rough wooden bench, one arm wrapped around his knees. His brown eyes, clouded at the edges by early cataracts, flicked toward Cale with sharp suspicion. A bruise bloomed along his cheek, the beginnings of a black eye, and his nose was crooked, a recent souvenir from the guards. "Cale," he rasped, voice hoarse and uneven from shouting and drink. "You're the one poking around, eh? Heard the city murmurs of you. Bold to come in here of all places." He coughed, a wet, hacking sound that made Cale flinch slightly. "I came to talk," Cale said cautiously, taking a step closer. I need your insight. That man in the tavern, well, what you were yelling about, it may be connected to something dangerous, something unusual." Thorin snorted, half laughing, half snorting through his nose. "Dangerous? Unusual? You don't even know the half of it, boy. Name's Thorin Malrich. Used to be captain, high ranks and all that pomp. Was on missions others dream of. Then it got under my skin." His eyes flicked to Cale, a faint trace of something unreadable lingering in them. "A shard, some cursed piece, ruined everything. They said I lost my mind, lost my honor, killed a man in the barracks because I couldn't stop myself. They dishonorably discharged me, left me nothing but scraps and shadows." Cale swallowed hard, noting the rough quiver in Thorin's voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't come to judge. I need to understand what happened, what the shard does. You've experienced it too, haven't you?" Thorin leaned back, wincing as his bruised body protested, and gave a crooked grin. "Experienced it? Ha! That's one word for it. If you want to survive touching its edges, you'll listen close, boy. It isn't polite. It doesn't ask. It seeps, shapes minds, twists the brave into fools, fools into worse." He shook his head, muttering under his breath, almost to himself. The city thinks I'm crazy, but I've survived. Seen the patterns? Felt the pull? You'll see soon enough. Kael shifted, stepping closer. I want your help. I think whatever this shard is, it's dangerous. I don't know how much, but it's affecting others. I need someone who understands. Someone like you. Thorin's lips curled into a wry smirk, a glimmer of pride hidden beneath his gruff exterior. Helping, eh? You risk your neck for shadows and the whispers. Fine. But you understand I don't come cheap. Bond's got to be paid, and I do things my way. Mess that up, you'll regret it. Kael nodded. I'll see to your bond. We can start there, but I need you. We can't do this alone. Thorin's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, betraying something beneath the gruff, cantankerous exterior. You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago. Maybe this'll be interesting after all. He leaned back, letting out a long breath. All right, Kael. Let's see if we can make sense of the madness together. Chapter 11. Unshackled, Kael's boots echoed against the stone corridor as he walked away from the heavy iron door, the clang of its latch still ringing in his ears. The lingering scent of damp stone and faint metallic tang of blood from Thorin's earlier scuffle clung to the air. He ran a hand through his hair, grimacing, not from the chill, but from the uneasy knot of anticipation tightening in his stomach. The old soldier had been chaotic, unpredictable, but there was a sharpness to him beneath the grime and drunken haze. Kael could feel it. The shard's influence wasn't just on him. It was in the very way Thorin carried himself, the faint tremor in his hands, the intensity in his brown eyes streaked with early cataracts. Ahead, the guard captain leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. You coming to the point, boy? The man's voice was gruff, seasoned by decades of authority, yet beneath it lingered a hint of curiosity. That cell isn't some hotel. You here to talk or to waste my time? Kael squared his shoulders, voice calm but firm. I need to post his bond. Thorin Malric. He let the name hang in the air, watching for the reaction. The captain's eyes flicked with recognition, sharp as a hawk. Malric, the captain said, voice low, almost a growl. Figured it'd be someone stupid enough to care for him. You know what you're dealing with? I do, Kael replied evenly, and I'm prepared to pay whatever is required. His hand rested lightly on the leather satchel at his side, where coin clinked faintly against metal. The captain's gaze softened, just slightly, though the skepticism remained. You sure? You know the stories. The trouble he's caused. Can't just hand him out to anyone willing to pay. Kael nodded, meeting the man's eyes steadily. I know the risks, but his knowledge, it's necessary. We can't afford to wait. A low whistle cut through the corridor. Necessary, huh? The captain muttered, stepping forward. He looked Kael up and down, measuring the resolve in the younger man. Finally, he sighed, the weight of years in his shoulders. Fine. Bond posted. But don't think you're taking him away from my jurisdiction without consequences. One wrong move, and it'll be on your head. Kael's jaw tightened, a subtle exhale betraying the tension he'd been holding. Understood. He handed over the coin, the clink loud in the quiet hall, a small, deliberate sound of commitment. The captain counted it quickly, nodding once. You've got yourself Malric, but keep him in line. I won't be responsible if he starts another riot. Kael inclined his head respectfully. I'll handle it. As he turned back toward the corridor's entrance, the weight of the moment pressed against him. Thorin Malric, grizzled, unpredictable, and dangerous, would be joining his team. Kael's mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and the unease of the shard's subtle pull lingering at the edges of his thoughts. He had no illusions about Thorin's temper or quirks, but the old soldier's experience and insights might be the edge they desperately needed. Kael stepped out into the cold night air, the city's distant hum washing over him. He let himself breathe for a moment, feeling the first real trace of hope in days, but beneath it, a shadow of caution threaded through his thoughts. The shard, the visions, the headaches, they hadn't lessened. If anything, they were only beginning to stir. And soon, he realized, he'd have to confront just how much it could touch not only Thorin, but everyone around him. Chapter 12. Returning shadows, the cart rattled over the cobblestone streets, the wheels shuddering with each uneven stone. Kael rode beside Thorin Malric, who leaned back against the wooden side, one hand brushing absently at the rough fabric of his coat. The old soldier's brown eyes, faintly clouded with the beginnings of cataracts, surveyed the city with a wary intensity, as if expecting unseen threats to leap from every shadow. "You know," Thorin said after a long silence, voice gravelly but tinged with curiosity, "I never thought anyone would pay my bond after what I pulled, least of all, someone who looked like you." He let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound rough in the chill evening air. Kael allowed a small smirk. "Lucky for you, I'm nothing if not persistent, and sometimes desperate." He glanced at Thorin, noticing the faint twitch in his jaw, the way his hand rested on the hilt of a knife strapped to his belt. "Besides, you might actually know things we don't. Things that matter." "Things that might get us all killed?" Thorin asked dryly, raising a brow. "I've been down this road before, kid. You don't know half of it yet." "I have a feeling I don't want to," Kael replied, his tone even but carrying a subtle edge of wry humor. "But we need you, and apparently you need someone willing to pay your debt." Thorin snorted. "Shh, maybe I do." He leaned back again, letting out a low whistle. "Guilds, shards, visions, makes me feel right at home." His gaze flicked to Kael, sharper now. "But you'll have to keep me fed. Don't expect me to be docile without some ale, or at least a strong meal." Lyra, perched in the rear of the cart with Dax, shook her head at the banter. "I swear, you two are going to start a war before we even make it back to the base." She gave Kael a pointed look. "Keep him in line, will you? He's unpredictable, yes, but also stubborn in ways that could get us killed if we're not careful." Kael's smirk softened into a brief, knowing glance at Thorin. "Noted." The streets gradually gave way to winding roads flanked by dense, dark forest. Shadows clung to the trees, shifting with the wind, and Kael's mind wandered to the shard. The way it tugged subtly at thoughts and instincts, the headaches and visions that had begun to haunt him and Rhiannon. He pressed his hand briefly to his temple, feeling the dull thrum of a familiar ache. "You look like you've been running with ghosts," Thorin observed, following Kael's motion with his eyes. "Something gnawing at that sharp mind of yours?" Kael met his gaze evenly. "Just remnants of the past." He let the answer hang, the unspoken weight of the shard's influence threading through it. Thorin's expression softened, just a fraction, with recognition of the burden. The journey continued in relative silence, punctuated by the occasional banter and observations. Rhiannon, remarking on the strange patterns in the forest, Lyra meticulously checking the supplies, Dax grumbling about the rough road. Thorin occasionally muttered to himself about old missions, never fully divulging details, his mind a tangle of memories and shard-touched experience. As the first lights of the guild base in Royth appeared on the horizon, Cale felt the tension in his shoulders ease just slightly. He knew the Shard's influence wasn't gone. It would continue to press against him, against the team. But having Thorin with them, alive and sharp, offered a sliver of reassurance. "Ready to see what we can do with you inside the guild?" Cale asked quietly, glancing at Thorin, who had been staring off into the distance, thoughtful. Thorin gave a crooked grin. "I've survived worse. Let's see if your guild can keep up." The cart rolled over the final rise, and the lights of Royth stretched out before them. A new chapter, darker and more uncertain, was about to begin, and Cale could feel the Shard's pulse echoing faintly in the back of his mind, a reminder that their journey was far from over. Chapter 13. Old Scars, New Shadows. By the time the team reached Royth, night had deepened into a cold, heavy silence. The guild compound loomed ahead, stone walls wrapped in flickering torchlight, the air thick with the scent of rain and metal. Cale guided the cart through the main gate, nodding at the guards who gave him questioning looks when they noticed the ragged man slumped beside him. Thorin sat upright despite his exhaustion, eyes half-lidded but still sharp, scanning every corner of the courtyard like a soldier measuring a battlefield. Inside the guild hall, the warmth from the central hearth offered little comfort. The murmur of voices faded when the group entered, eyes shifting toward them, toward Thorin, his weathered face, the faint bruise beneath one eye, and the quiet gravity that clung to him like smoke. Lyra was the first to break the tension. "We need a medic," she said firmly, glancing toward the infirmary doors. "He's got broken ribs, likely a concussion." Thorin waved a dismissive hand. "I've had worse from sparring drills," he muttered. "Save your healers for someone who can't walk." Rhiannon crossed her arms, unconvinced. "You'll see them, whether you like it or not." Her tone was gentler than her words, but it carried the steel of command. Cale managed a faint smirk. "You can fight the healers if you'd like, but I'm not getting blamed when they throw you back out." Thorin gave a crooked grin, the ghost of mischief flickering through the exhaustion. "You've got a bit of a spine after all. Good. You'll need it." The exchange drew a few uneasy looks from other guild members passing through. Whispers followed them down the corridor until they reached the inner chambers, where the guildmasters waited. The chamber was dimly lit, lined with maps and relics from past campaigns. Two guildmasters sat at the far end. Master Arik Vile, broad-shouldered and weathered, his voice often as cold as the northern wind, and Master Serena Dahl, sharp-eyed, pragmatic, with a tone that could cut through hesitation like glass. Cale gave a respectful nod. "Masters, we've returned from the field. There's been a development." Serene's gaze shifted to Thorin, her expression unreadable. "I see that. Care to explain why you've brought a prisoner into the guild halls?" Thorin lifted his chin, voice gravelly but calm. "Former prisoner, technically. Thorin Malric, captain of the Iron Vanguards. Or I was, before your council deemed me unstable." That earned a reaction. Arik straightened in his chair. "Malric?" His tone darkened. "You were dishonorably discharged from the Vanguard. Word was, you killed a fellow officer." Thorin met the accusation head-on. "He laid hands on me first. The Shard had already begun whispering by then. I wasn't myself." His voice lowered. Not that anyone cared to understand that part. Silence fell. Cale could feel the tension rising, the weight of the revelation pressing into the room. Serene folded her arms. "You expect us to believe you were influenced by some Shard?" Cale stepped forward before Thorin could answer. "He's telling the truth. The things he described match what Rhiannon and I experienced after contact. His tone was calm, but carried an urgency that cut through the disbelief. Arik frowned, studying Kyle for a long moment. "You're certain?" Kyle hesitated, then nodded once. "As certain as I can be. Whatever this is, it's connected, and he might know more about it than any of us." Serene's gaze flicked between them before she sighed, fingers tapping against the desk. Even if that's true, bringing him here without clearance was reckless. The Vanguard blacklisted him for a reason. Kale met her stare evenly. "With respect, Master Dahl, we don't have the luxury of ignoring experience right now. We've seen what the Shard can do. If there's a chance he understands it, any part of it, we can't afford not to listen." Thorin grunted, smirking faintly. "Didn't think I'd be someone's chance again. Feels almost nostalgic." Arik leaned back, folding his arms. "You're no soldier anymore, Malrich. If you stay here, you follow our orders. Step out of line, and I'll have you thrown out myself. Clear?" Thorin gave a mock salute, eyes glinting. "Crystal, Guildmaster." Serene's voice softened just slightly. "He'll need a full medical check before anything else. After that, we'll debrief. You can rest, Captain Malrich. And Kale?" She paused. "Good work. Questionable judgment, but good work." Kale inclined his head in acknowledgement, the faintest trace of relief passing through his expression. As Thorin was led toward the infirmary, he muttered under his breath, "Didn't think I'd be back in a place like this. Let's see if your guild's got more sense than the army did." Kale watched him go, uneasy but resolute. He knew this was only the beginning, that whatever connected them to the Shards was deeper and darker than the Guildmasters yet understood. And as the torchlight flickered across the walls, the faint whisper of the Shard's call brushed against his mind again. It hadn't finished with him. Not yet. Chapter 14. Echoes beneath the skin. Morning light crept through the guild hall's stained windows, painting fractured gold across the stone floor. The air smelled faintly of iron and old parchment, the familiar scent of discipline and secrets. Thorin sat shirtless on one of the infirmary cots, his torso wrapped in clean linen. Bruises mapped his ribs, ugly and purple, while faint scars, old and deliberate, traced along his shoulders. He looked every bit the battered veteran, yet the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled. The healer, a wiry woman named Marin Fulks, moved with brisk precision as she tied off the last bandage. "You're lucky," she muttered, snipping the excess cloth. "Another inch to the left, and that rib might have punctured something vital." Thorin smirked faintly. "Would have been a quiet way to go. Beats rotting in a cell." Marin gave him a look halfway between pity and annoyance. "Try not to test fate again any time soon." "Noted," he replied, but his tone made it clear he'd do as he pleased regardless. Outside the infirmary, Kyle lingered by the doorway, arms crossed. He could still feel a dull hum under his skin. The Shard's whisper, quiet but constant, like static beneath his thoughts. It hadn't gone away since Valen. Rhiannon leaned beside him against the wall, her expression soft but worried. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Bringing him in, I mean. He doesn't exactly blend with the rest of the guild." Kyle exhaled slowly. "He's rough, yeah, but he's seen what we're dealing with. Maybe more than anyone here." Lyra joined them, holding a mug of tea that steamed faintly in her hands. "You trust him?" Kyle hesitated. "Not yet, but I trust what he knows." Lyra tilted her head. "That's not the same thing." Kyle almost smiled. "Close enough." By midday, Thorin was cleared for movement. The Guildmasters summoned the team for a formal debrief in the council chamber, a high-ceilinged room lined with banners from old expeditions. Thorin stood before them, posture straight, despite the lingering ache in his body. His eyes flicked briefly to Kael, then to Master Arik and Master Serene. Serene's voice broke the silence first. "You're lucky your new allies vouched for you, Captain Malric. Otherwise, you'd still be rotting in that cell." Thorin inclined his head. "Luck's never been something I rely on, Master Dahl." Arik's gaze was unreadable. "Then rely on your word. Tell us what you know of these shards." Thorin's jaw tightened as he spoke. "The Vanguard found one during a border excavation near the Dusk Range. Looked like a crystal, black and red, humming with energy. I was part of the containment team." He paused, expression darkening. "We didn't realize it could think or feel. The longer we stayed near it, the worse it got. Nightmares, voices, whispers that told us things we shouldn't know." Rhiannon leaned forward slightly. "And the man the one who died?" Thorin's face hardened, but he didn't flinch. "He accused me of losing control. He wasn't wrong. The shard was already inside me by then, not physically, but in my head. It twisted things. I barely remember what happened after that." Silence filled the room. Even Arik, who rarely betrayed emotion, looked unsettled. Finally, Serene spoke. "And you believe this same corruption is affecting Kael and Rhiannon?" Thorin's gaze turned toward them, assessing, sharp. "I don't believe it. I can see it." Kael met his eyes, feeling a faint, unwelcome echo stir beneath his skin. "Then tell me what to expect." Thorin gave a low, humorless chuckle. "Expect nothing. That's the trick. You'll think you're fine, and then one night, you'll wake up convinced your own shadow is whispering your name." Lyra shivered slightly. "You're not exactly reassuring, Captain. Didn't say I was trying to be." When the meeting adjourned, the tension followed them like a second shadow. The guildmasters agreed to keep Thorin under provisional status, an unofficial consultant, confined to guild grounds under Kael's supervision. Later, as dusk settled over Royth, Kael found himself on the training yard's edge, staring at the horizon where the clouds burned with the last light of day. His head throbbed again, a low pulse behind his eyes, familiar and cruel. Rhiannon joined him quietly, her steps soft against the gravel. "You're worse, aren't you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "It's manageable." She gave him a look, gentle but knowing. "You don't have to lie to me, Kael." He exhaled through his nose. "If I admit it's getting worse, it makes it real." Rhiannon's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's already real." They stood there for a long while, the silence between them speaking louder than words. Behind them, Thorin's voice broke the moment. "Romantic brooding, huh? Classic side effect," he said dryly, lighting a worn pipe as he leaned on the fence. "Don't worry, it passes once the hallucinations start." Kael shot him a look somewhere between irritation and grim amusement. "You're full of encouragement, aren't you?" Thorin grinned through the smoke. "Someone's got to keep your optimism in check." Rhiannon shook her head, but there was the faintest curve of a smile on her lips. For all his roughness, Thorin brought something the guild hadn't had in a long time: brutal honesty wrapped in gallows humor. Kael didn't say it aloud, but he felt it. For better or worse, Thorin Malric was one of them now. Chapter 15. Echoes of Nalara. The road to Nalara wound through a narrow valley, flanked by steep ridges that cast long, crooked shadows across the path. The air grew heavier the closer they came, an almost tangible quiet pressing against their ears. Even the horses seemed uneasy, snorting and tossing their heads as if wary of something unseen. Kael rode ahead, his mind half lost in the dull throb pulsing behind his eyes. The shard's whispers had been faint for days, yet here they pressed closer again, murmurs threading through thought like smoke. He blinked hard, steadying himself as the village came into view beyond the thinning trees. Nalara was small, barely more than 24 weathered structures gathered around a sunken square. Strange symbols, chalked in white and grey, covered the doors and fences, each one drawn with deliberate precision. No children ran between the homes. No merchants called from their stalls. Only the sound of wind stirring the old cloth banners that hung limp in the air. "Cheery place," Dax muttered, breaking the silence. "Think they welcome visitors, or just stare till we leave?" "They'll welcome coin," Lyra replied, adjusting the strap of her satchel. "Everyone does, eventually." Rhiannon's gaze swept the village. "It's not coin they live on here. I've read of Nalara. They survive on trades of thought, memory, emotion, fragments of the mind, given and taken." Dax raised a brow. "Right. That sounds healthy." Kael dismounted, boots crunching the frost-thin dirt. "We'll keep to the main square," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "Ask about anyone who studies anomalies or old relics. Someone here might know of the shard's kind." They moved deeper into the village. A few faces peered from shuttered windows, hollow-eyed, gaunt, and silent. When they reached the square, a man stepped out from a low building, marked by a sigil painted in pale ash. He wore layered robes of grey, his hair cropped short, his expression calm, in a way that felt unnervingly measured. "Travelers," the man said, voice even and distant. "You carry noise. It stirs the quiet." Lyra glanced to Kael. "He means us?" "Who are you?" Kael asked, stepping forward. The man tilted his head. "I am Elder Varen, speaker for the Thought Weavers of Nalara. Few come here willingly. Fewer leave unchanged." Rhiannon folded her arms. "We're not here to change. We're looking for knowledge, something old, dangerous, a shard of power. Have you heard of such things?" Elder Varen's gaze lingered on Kael for a long, heavy moment before answering. "Power leaves echoes. They hum through the mind long after they pass. Yes, I've felt such a hum before. It distorts those who touch it." Kael's pulse quickened. "You've seen it?" "Not seen," Varen said, voice softening. "Felt. It came once, through another, long ago. A soldier who lost himself in dreams, not his own. He spoke of visions and hunger. Then he vanished into the woods." Thoren's face darkened. "A soldier, you say?" Varen's eyes flicked to him, narrowing slightly. "You understand, then, the way madness masquerades as revelation?" Kael's jaw tensed. "We need to know if there's anyone here who might know more. Someone who studies these echoes. Anything." The elder looked thoughtful. "Perhaps. There are those in the outer dwellings who listen more deeply than most. Seek a woman called Ceres. She gathers what others fear to hear. But tread lightly, Captain. The echo within you already stirs." Kael blinked. "Within me?" But Varen was already turning away, back toward the dim interior of the hall. "You'll understand soon enough." The group stood silent for a long moment as the village resumed its oppressive stillness. The air seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration at the edge of perception. Lyra exhaled through her nose. "I hate this place." "Then we'll be quick," Kael said, though his voice carried little conviction. He cast one last look toward the hall, the whisper in his mind pulsing once more, faint but familiar, like the shard itself was listening. Let's find Ceres," he muttered, mounting up again. and hope this place doesn't swallow us before we do. They moved on, the faint, whispering wind following close behind. Chapter 16. Whispers of the Forgotten. The road that wound through Nalara's outskirts was little more than a thread of stone and ash. The farther they rode, the thinner the air seemed to grow. Houses here were older, bowed and split by time, their walls marked by sigils that glimmered faintly when Kale's shadow crossed them. He felt the hum again, low, rhythmic, steady as a heartbeat. The shard's influence curled faintly at the back of his mind, brushing thought and memory alike. He grit his teeth and rode on. Ceres's dwelling stood alone on a rise beyond the village, a narrow structure of blackened timber and bone-colored stone. Smoke rose in tight ribbons from its chimney. "Charming," Dax said, sliding off his horse. "If she offers tea, I'm declining. You'll drink it if it's polite," Lyra replied under her breath, tugging at her gloves. "Just maybe not finish it." Rhiannon shot them both a look, though a hint of dry amusement tugged at her mouth. "Let's not antagonize the locals, especially the kind that live this far out." Kyle dismounted, boots sinking into the brittle grass. "Stay sharp, she might know something we don't." He knocked once. The door opened before his hand fell back to his side. The woman who appeared was older, her hair pale as frost and her eyes near colorless. Yet they were bright, alive with an alert, unsettling focus. "Travelers," she murmured. "The echo reaches you too, then?" Kyle hesitated. "You're Ceres?" "I am what's left of her," she said, with a thin smile. "Come in. The wind listens." They entered a small room, cluttered with parchment, vials, and crystalline fragments strung together by silver thread. Everything hummed softly, like the sound of distant water under stone. Ceres moved to the hearth and stirred the fire. "You seek the Valith, don't you?" Rhiannon stiffened. "How do you—" "Because you reek of it," Ceres interrupted, voice sharp but not unkind. "That kind of power leaves a scent, a trail, and one of you—" her gaze drifted to Kael, "carries it inside." Kael felt his throat tighten. "You mean the shard?" Ceres nodded slowly. "A fragment of something far older. The Valith aren't simple relics. They are echoes of thought, memory made physical. The first ones were born from the remnants of beings that existed before our world took form. What you carry is not inert, Captain. It remembers." The room went silent except for the faint crackle of the fire. Dax shifted uneasily. "So what? The thing's alive?" "In a sense," Ceres said. "It feeds on resonance, emotion, will. The more it touches your mind, the more you'll hear it whisper." Her eyes flicked toward Kael's clenched hands. "And soon, it may not stop." Kael swallowed hard, meeting her gaze. "Can it be controlled?" Ceres's lips curved faintly. "Controlled? No. But perhaps guided. The Valith does not obey, but it listens. If you resist, it fights back. If you open yourself too much, it consumes. Balance, Captain. That is the knife's edge you walk." Rhiannon stepped forward, voice tight. "You said others carried these echoes before. What happened to them?" Ceres's expression darkened. "They either went mad or became something else. Some say the Valith remade them into echoes themselves." The fire popped, and the silence that followed was deep enough to hear breath and heartbeat. Kael looked down at his hands again, the faint pulse behind his eyes flaring like a drumbeat. "If it's that dangerous, how do I stop it from taking more of me?" Ceres regarded him for a long moment, then whispered, "By finding where it came from. There is a place, buried beneath the old roots of the world, where the first echoes were born. Find that, and you might find what you've truly been carrying. Where? Lyra asked quickly. Ceres turned toward the window, her gaze distant. Far north, beyond the frost line. A place long abandoned, the ruins of Carith Hall. The name hung heavy in the air. Kael's jaw set. Then that's where we go. Ceres's mouth twitched. A smirk, or perhaps pity. Then may the echoes spare what's left of you.